Giving God glory worldwide, this is the Gospel America Television Network. Welcome to Real Talk with the Jenkins, with MJ, Marcella Jenkins, and Dr. G, Gary Jenkins. And now, here's Real Talk.
Hi everybody, welcome to Real Talk with the Jenkins. I'm Dr. G.
I'm Lady MJ. And we are the Jenkins.
Now we have a special guest with us who is the president of the San Angelo NAACP, Shirley Spears. We want to certainly welcome you, Shirley, to our broadcast. This is a very special year for the NAACP.
Yes, it is. Here in the local area, we're celebrating 75 years of service to the San Angelo community.
And as such, let's talk about the NAACP. Now, we've got a video where we did a little research on the NAACP, which is interesting, MJ.
Yes.
That, did you know the NAACP was not founded by just black folk?
Yes, I heard that already. Yes.
Okay.
I did know that.
Yeah, there was a mixture of white people and Jewish people.
Mm.
And then it emerged because there was a need, and then I'm going to let Shirley tell us more about that. Mm-hmm. There was a need because some people in the white community realized the injustices that were done to black people in America. Yes. And one of the things that we realized, there was this horrible movie that was done, The Birth of a Nation. Are you familiar with that, Shirley?
Absolutely.
So what do you think about what happened in the formation of the NAACP and the fact that there was a need to bring about justice for those of us who have African heritage in us? Well,
first of all, you know, in Abe Lincoln's world, in his home state, there were a lot of things going on, a lot of lynchings of black men in particular that was going on. And so there were a group of white men and women who were interested in what they could do. Certainly they knew that because they were white, they wouldn't be able to just do it on their own. So they contacted some of the great black minds at that time, namely W.E.B. Du Bois, who pulled in some other black people. And of course, you know, W.E.B. Du Bois had already documented his Niagara movement. So your point that, yes, there were white people who were involved in the starting of it, the point is that the baseline for W.E.B. Du Bois' Niagara movement is what the basis is for the starting and formation of the NAACP in this country in 1909. And then, of course, we had African Americans who were involved in news and all those types of things, because that's when we were great, brilliant, and people gave us credit for that. And, of course, the tables have turned since that time. So thanks to W.E.B. Du Bois and his foundational documentation on the Niagara movement, which we all understand what that was, the NAACP was founded to try to stop the injustices, particularly for the hanging of black men in Abraham Lincoln's home state.
Tell us more about was it the Niagara movement? Tell us about that. How did W.E. Du Bois and the Niagara movement have an impact on what we're talking about today?
You know, W.E.B. Du Bois was a brilliant educator, academician, PhD man, and he was always looking at ways that the African American population could be helped with being able to help themselves and being able to access those things that were available in this country at that time. So there were several people, African Americans primarily, that were involved with him to try to get the Niagara movement to be the baseline for how black people could move ahead in this country. And so, of course, fighting injustices was just the norm back then, because black people were always, it was always some problem because America just would not acknowledge what it had done to the African American during that time.
When you say the Niagara movement,
Niagara, New York. That was when they had their first meeting of I can't think of the proper name of the group of African Americans that met, but it was Niagara, New York.
So that's up near Niagara Falls then?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
When you think of the Niagara movement now merging, did it merge, so to speak?
Well, it wasn't so much a merger as it was that the foundational doctrine of that movement was the baseline for starting the NAACP. There were already a lot of things that were already standard that black people needed to do and not do, and what they needed the white community in America to respond to overall.
What do you say to people who don't know the history of the NAACP and how it came into existence? What do you say to them? Because the average person today, especially our youth, don't really have a good recollection of what the NAACP is, what it stands for, and all of the great work that it has done in the past.
Well, I agree with that in part, Apostle Jenkins, but sometimes I think that it's also our generation that doesn't have a good grip on what the NAACP stands for, even what the call letters are, why it was that, how it got started. And so certainly we can't expect our youth to necessarily understand or embrace it. One of the things we don't do in this country is tell the truth about slavery. There are textbooks, for instance, in some states that indicate that Africans were brought over here willingly, they were indentured servants, they were paid, they were compensated, all of that. So when you look at how we can't even in this country acknowledge that we established a system of slavery, that black people didn't decide while they were in Africa one day, oh, we want to go to this new country, we want to be enslaved, we want to be beaten, we want to be abused. And so when you look at that, you can't expect the younger generation of any race to appreciate or understand it, because our generation and those who are a little older than us, we don't acknowledge, because we feel that because of civil rights legislation, primarily that was passed in the 60s, that we've arrived at some point and we don't have to associate ourselves as being a part of the Negro or colored race. And so we don't even acknowledge our own history. We go to the side that oppresses black people more than it aids them. And so we don't acknowledge that. We don't share that, because it's like it's something that happened so long ago. And of course, we know that was just 60 years ago that a lot of these things, and we're all older than that, that a lot of these things happened. And so it's unfortunate that we don't embrace our own history, because we've always been taught not to. And it's always been made fun of or never given credit for the wonderful things that we do. We were just talking about the 20s just a little bit ago before we started this interview. You look at all the accomplishments of black men and women in the 20s, when we talk about the Harlem Renaissance, all of our great intellectuals who made major milestones during the 20s. But what the marketing concept has had America and the world to really focus on is what was going on with prohibition in the 20s for white people, not what it was that black people did. And so we call it the Roaring 20s. Rarely do black people then take the time to say, okay, well, what were black people doing? Well, let's take a look and see what James Baldwin was doing. Let's look at Zora Neale Hurston. Let's look at W.E.B. Du Bois and all those intellectuals who already had PhDs, many of them. But we don't look at that. We look at the Roaring 20s with the things that were, some of the things that were really illegally done, as opposed to looking at what our own people were able to establish in the 20s that have lasted. Here we are, 2021, and a lot of the things that were done by black people during the 20s is still with us.
Shirley, when was the Black Wall Street?
That was in Oklahoma, and right. that was in Oklahoma when the white people burned down the economic engine, if you will.
Because the reason why I asked is because maybe 5 to 6 years ago, I didn't even know that there was a Black Wall Street.
Well, that's interesting, and that goes back to what I said earlier, is that we don't know our own history. No disrespect to you, but that is part of the problem, because we only believe what sometimes we see in books. Mm-hmm. And the major accomplishments from slavery from 400 years ago that we were able to get through, the fact that we were able to even withstand slavery, withstand even the transatlantic travel to this country. We don't pay attention in our own community. We don't listen to the stories of our ancestors that we, in our generation, we probably saw grandparents, great-grandparents, and even great-great-grandparents. And we have disregarded and discarded the stories that they told us. And so we didn't pass that along to those of us who have younger children. We didn't pass that along. So we've lost a lot of that oral history. All of those things are known when you look at people who grew up in America, because everybody didn't grow up in the South, but a lot of those stories migrated with our families. We just stopped talking about it because it became taboo to discuss it because we were integrating and acculturating into the mainstream America. So we don't talk about that. You know, our children don't realize some of the warriors even in Africa. They don't understand, I was talking to someone recently, they don't understand that black people have fought in every war in this country, including the militia through the Revolutionary War. They think that we just kind of appeared somehow during the Civil Rights Movement, during the Civil War. Well, you know, we had been here since 1619 and some before that. So we were in every war. Here in this town, we have a wonderful museum, Fort Concho, which has seen actually the living and the working of Buffalo Soldiers, as they're called, 9th and 10th Cavalry, of these colored troops who actually lived and worked in San Angelo, Texas, at the fort. That is an original fort. It's not one that was built to look like a fort. It is the original fort. All of those buildings are original buildings, and they have been maintained well. The first African American to graduate from the military academy was an African American man that lived and worked here in San Angelo for a period of time, Henry L. Flipper. We have a street that was named in his honor in the 80s, and it takes you into the main section of the fort. And so when we have programs and events that talk about that, it's like, do we even want to know? Do we care? And so I think the problem is that people say the NAACP hasn't done anything lately. Well, that's not true because they've always fought for civil rights for all people, not just black people. There have been cases that were dealt with by the first black justice, Thurgood Marshall. There were cases that he dealt with while he was in the NAACP and getting movement that were not just for black people. And so somehow or another we want to look at injustice as only being black people, and if that's the case, then we don't need to talk about it. But there are injustices when you talk about civil rights that apply to everybody. And so when people, even in this town, last year we were dealing with the Confederate name change for one of the schools here. And the NAACP played an integral part in that, and I was certainly the spokesperson for our unit. And, you know, when you look at social media, there were all kinds of accusations and things that were said about the NAACP's value. It was irrelevant, that I was stupid, and all of those types of things, because America still will not live up to its greatest crime, which was slavery.
Okay, we're going to come back to you in a moment. We're talking about the 75th anniversary of the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, in case you didn't know what that meant. And we're going to talk about what's missing in America's history books in our public schools.
Real Talk with the Jenkins will be right back after this commercial break.
My name is Travis with Grace Transmissions. Here at Grace Transmissions, we have a reputation for customer service, and we've been serving the San Angelo area for over 45 years. Our focus is you, the customer. So whether you need a diagnostic check or a complete transmission service repair, we're here for you. Grace Transmissions, where service meets quality, and that's our #1 priority.
We're here when you need us.
Gray's Transmissions, 1202 Pulliam Street, San Angelo.
You drag your kids all over town to this doctor's office and that dentist's office. And for women's health, there's still another doctor's office. For behavioral or mental health, there's still another office. At La Esperanza Clinic, all of your family's health care is in one place. La Esperanza Clinic, New Year, Healthy You. Come visit us today.
Need commercial or residential electrical work? Call RM Electrical Contractors at 325-486-1309. RM Electrical Contractors. We light the way.
For God's sake, you got to give more power to the people. For God's sake, why don't you give more power to the people?
And now back to Real Talk with MJ and Dr. G.
We're talking about the NAACP. It's now 75 years old. And the NAACP MJ, has gone through a lot of changes, but what the NAACP has done and continues to do is educate us about our own history. Because in the history books, I don't know about your school, but in the history books that I read and the history that I was taught, I never heard of Black Wall Street in Tulsa. Never heard that there were black folks that had their own businesses, that had their own banks, they had their own grocery stores, and you name it, and were very successful. And unfortunately, hatred and racism swept across Oklahoma and destroyed that community. Terrible thing, but hopefully we're learning some great things from that. Our special guest is the president of the San Angelo NAACP, Ms. Shirley Spears. Ms. Spears, talk to us about the missing elements of America's history books.
Well, there's so many. We don't have time. You'd be here 17 hours. We don't have time to cover all of them, but you're right. I think you grew up in the Midwest, and so there are a lot of stories that perhaps were not told. A lot of black people migrated from southern states because that's where a lot of the slaves were brought into the ports. There were some on the eastern part of the state, but they migrated south to west, a lot of them, some to the Midwest, as you indicated, your family. But, you know, what's missing is why they were even brought here to begin with, the truth as to why the Africans were brought here, the truth as to what it was that the slaves did once they got here, how they helped to build this country physically, how they used their spiritual access to God and their higher being to help the spiritual birth in this nation, how we withstood beatings and lynchings and murders and rapes and and all of that. When you think of the different skin colors of black people, and everybody from Africa was not as black-skinned as I am. There were different colors, but we also take things out of context and try to spin it so that it's comfortable for us. We, even in my own family, we have a lot of mulattoes who are from the Louisiana area. And I have some relatives who seem to be proud that there was this mixture, okay, of French and black and white. And my perspective is, okay, well, a lot of those instances, and I would say most of them than none, was based on rape. It wasn't that they desired my great-great-great-grandmother as an African woman, but they took advantage of them because they treated us like animals. And of course, when they had these additional births, then it's okay because they've just added to their power and their financial net worth. In some stories, including mine, then you have some that were light enough to pass for white, and they were able to migrate through some things, and they had certain privileges living in the big house as opposed to living in the slave quarters, depending on their skin tone, and they were educated, some of them, and all of that type of stuff. Those are the realities. Those are true stories from our families that, fortunately, my family has kept a lot of those stories alive, and we've told the younger generations what my mother and my grandmothers told us. But the truth is that America has never dealt with the truth. And that is that they did not. People say, well, when we came to this country, we didn't come to this country. We were brought to this country. And it makes it different when you use those words in context in terms of some other groups that actually wanted to come here for a different experience and different opportunity. We did not desire to leave the continent of Africa and come to America. We were brought to this country against our will.
I find that interesting. When you were talking about the different skin colors, back in my great-grandmother's days, from what I understand, is when they started, because so many women were dying on their way over here, they started breeding them. Now, it was interesting that they could breed them so they could get more slaves, but they couldn't, if one of them fell in love with one of the white men or whatever, they couldn't marry them, So that, kind of like, it bothered me a lot that, once again, there we are, we're just used as a product, not as a person.
Correct. I mean, we were cattle and chattel. We were animals, and that's how they treated us. You know, even our own presidents in this country had their black mistresses, and you know, we look at President Jefferson and all of that whole story of that whole family repeatedly having children. And so it wasn't that the slave women would fall in love with the white slave master or whoever was on the ship. It was that they were impregnated, you know, after being abused for sexual satisfaction, and that's plain and simple what it was. You know, even when you look at how the Native Americans, as we say, the Indians were treated, we know the story that is publicized about Pocahontas falling in love with John Smith, and John Smith falling in love with Pocahontas, and that was not the true story. There was a lot of things in that storyline, rape included, and you know, just understanding that it wasn't this fairy tale that America has told the world, even about Pocahontas. And so if they have not told the truth about Pocahontas, then certainly they're not going to tell the truth about creating a whole system for slavery. They're not going to talk about how without that labor, this country would not be all that it is. They're not going to talk about the skill set that the slaves brought with them that were able to help build this country and to work the fields, and how some of those same things were negative factors, right, that caused many of the slaves to die, get sick, and all of those types of things, because this is a totally different environment here in this country. The climate, everything, the food, what was grown, what was not, what was planted. It was a totally different experience. The language, the way, the design of how God had made us, our tongue, the top of our mouths, how we could pronounce things, how we couldn't pronounce things, and we were forced to adopt their way of living, including language. And that was one of the things that they appreciated about having the slaves from different parts of Africa, because they oftentimes spoke different languages and had different dialects and all of that. But through all of that, these slaves through generations were able to establish communication. So, you know, when you look at what makes the world turn, it's getting the information out. So we were able, as a group of slaves from different parts of the country, speaking different languages, having different beliefs, to establish language that we could understand and learn the language that the slave masters had, and be able to communicate and save each other and love each other and build families and do the things that we were being forced to do that was totally unfamiliar with any of the slaves that had been brought over.
Okay, we're going to go into a commercial break again, but we're talking about African American history, the birth of the NAACP, now celebrating 75 years. Did you know that, MJ? The organization is 75 years old this year, and we certainly salute the NAACP for the work it's done. We'll be back in a moment.
Real Talk with the Jenkins will be right back after this commercial break.
You drag your kids all over town to this doctor's office and that dentist's office. And for women's health, there's still another doctor's office. For behavioral or mental health, there's still another office. At La Esperanza Clinic, all of your family's health care is in one place. La Esperanza Clinic, New Year, Healthy You. Come visit us today.
Need commercial or residential electrical work? Call RM Electrical Contractors at 325-486-1309. RM Electrical Contractors. We light the way.
For God's sake, you got to give more power to the people. For God's sake, why don't you give more power to the people?
Join us on the Gospel America Television Network. Call 203-410-6053. That number again is 203-410-6053. Download our app from the App Store or from Google Play to watch all of our programs on smartphones and tablets on the Gospel America Television Network. Broadcasting worldwide to every nation, this is the Gospel America Television Network. Broadcasting to every nation on Roku, Fire TV, Apple TV, and online at gospelamerica.net. And now back to Real Talk with MJ and Dr. G.
We're back and we're talking about American history, African American history, the untold story, and the 75th anniversary of the San Angelo chapter of the NAACP. Our special guest is none other than Miss Shirley Spears. She is the president of the San Angelo chapter, and we are most grateful for all of the hard work that she's done since she's taken that helm. Shirley, tell us more about the direction of the NAACP and anything else you deem necessary to bring out.
Well, thank you for clarifying that, Apostle, that the NAACP on a national spectrum started in 1909. And so from a local perspective, we started here in 1946 as a result of a gentleman named L.A. Rabin, who was a businessman and resident of San Angelo, and he started the local chapter. He, through the years, was known for agitating, which is still one of our things that we do at the NAACP, and all the while he was very, very respected. He was chosen to serve on the committee that began the integration of schools here in San Angelo in 1954. He helped many black people get good jobs, as we used to say back then, for the first time with some of these white institutions that had never hired black people. And he was just a man who was no nonsense, and if he saw something going wrong, he dealt with that. So we continue on his legacy with this administration. We're in our second term in this administration, and our theme this year is doing the necessary work. And what that means is whatever is necessary to ensure that there are no injustices that we leave uncovered.
We're out of time, and I thank you so much. You have, this doesn't do it justice. We really need to have a whole week of discussing this, because there's a lot of truth. But we got to go, and I think you hit the nail on the head. The truth shall make you free, and we need to tell the truth. And unlike the history books that I read growing up in school, they didn't tell the truth. So hopefully now we'll start telling the truth. But I just kind of hope, MJ, that we'll tell it in a more gentler way.
Yes.
All right, you're watching Real Talk with the Jenkins. Thank you so much for being with us. I'm Dr. G.
I'm Lady MJ.
And we are the Jenkins.